Last Sunday we began a series of messages on marriage and the family, and we're going to continue that today. Last week we talked about making a marriage last a lifetime, happily. And today we're going to talk about 5 myths of marriage. And we're going to look at Genesis chapter 2, beginning at verse 21 and going down through verse 25. Here God gives us the establishment, the foundations of marriage here in these verses. So we'll pick it up in verse 21. Where it says, the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, now I got to say, I think Adam probably said more than what's recorded right here. When God brings Eve to him, it was probably thank you a million times, thank you. Wowza! Kind of thing. But then he said, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and the wife, and were not ashamed. Whenever I prepare to marry a couple, I generally go through some sessions of premarital counseling. And at one time, I used to use a marriage inventory that I would have the bride-to-be and the groom-to-be complete separately. And it dealt with all kinds of subjects like conflict resolution, financial management, communication, in-laws, spiritual beliefs. And each category had 10 statements. And so there were well over 100 statements that they would go through, and they would mark whether they agreed or somewhat agreed or disagreed and all that. Now, there were no right or wrong answers, technically. I mean, people just gave the responses that they felt at that time. But there were some responses that you would say would be more healthy than other statements. And all the times that I gave that inventory, and all the couples that completed them, never did I have a couple answer those statements, more than half of them, in a healthy manner. Which really isn't to be surprising. I mean, after all, they're entering into something that they've never experienced before. And so how could they know exactly what to expect? But sometimes I would read these responses, and it's laughable. For example, one of the statements is, I feel that I have learned everything that I ever need to learn about my fiancée. Think about that. They probably haven't even talked about, who's going to clean the toilet yet, and things like that, and what happens when you leave clothes laying everywhere, and whose family we're going to spend Christmas with, and all that type of stuff. And a lot of people would write, I agree with this. I've learned everything there is to know about my fiancé. Or how about this one? Some of them would say, I do not feel that we will ever have any serious problems in our marriage. Tell you, when I would read that one, I'd almost fall out of my chair, in my office, because they would put agree. I don't think we'll ever have any serious problems in our marriage. I mean, there are a lot of problems that come up in our marriage that are out of our control, like health issues and things like that, financial issues sometimes. And they say, we'll never have any serious problems in our marriage. Now, I don't want to be too critical of these responses, because I probably was the same way prior to my marriage, because we have these idealistic expectations that we often go into marriage with, and it's to be expected. If you've never been married before, you don't know what it's like. You don't know what's going to happen, what's going to transpire. And so you've gathered your information often from faulty thinking processes, and sometimes from things you've read or just things you've assumed. And we find out many times that what we expected isn't the reality. I read in a magazine one time where somebody said too many marriages begin with bliss and end up with blisters. And I think one of the reasons for that is not only the unrealistic expectations we have going into marriage, but there are also a lot of myths that we develop or cling to after we've said, I do. And for whatever reason, even though as I share these with you this morning, you're going to think, well, of course that's not true. And yet it's amazing how many people and how many times we will still grab a hold of these things as if they really are true. So I want to share with you 5 myths of marriage. And we're going to work on some things that really have to do with relationship and communication and that type this morning as we progress along. But the first one is this: the myth that marriages cannot last in today's culture. There is a myth that because of all the temptations, because of all the pressures that are around us, often both parents have to work, and there's just so much pressure on modern society with the finances and the pressures of our culture, that marriages just can't last today. And so it's not to be expected. Well, that may be the philosophy of some, but it certainly is not the reality. First of all, the scriptures declare, for example, when Jesus said, "What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder," it doesn't say, "What God has joined together, let not man put asunder," unless you're living in the 21st century, and then it's to be expected that you split up. It doesn't say that. Or Romans 7 and verse 2, where it says a woman is bound to her husband for as long as he lives, unless the pressures just get too great, and then we can't blame her for leaving. It doesn't say that. The expectation was that marriage was to last forever, and that hasn't changed, even if our culture has changed. And I want to prove to you, not just from the Scripture, but also from those who are living the Scriptures, the reality of lasting marriage. Because I know that this church is a shining example of lasting marriage. So here's what I want to do. If you have been married, or if you were married, and now maybe your spouse has passed away, but you were married for at least 50 years, I'd like for you to stand. Okay, 50 years. Now I want you to stay standing. And I want you to note that people like Larry and Peggy Bailey, Betty and Edward McGuire, Jack and Nancy Young, and maybe some more that I'm not thinking of, can't be here today. So there's at least 3 more couples. And look at this. This is a lot of people. Now, if you've been married at least 25 years, I want you to stand. I want all of you to stay standing. Now, if you've been married 25 years at least, I want you to stand. And look at this. Isn't this awesome? Thank you. You may be seated. All right. Great examples here. Now, somebody, if I say right here is proof that marriages can last, somebody might say, yeah, but all those people were married in the 1900s. Well, we're only 17 years into the 2000s, the 2000s, so nobody in the 2000s that got married has been married 25 years. But I guarantee you that if you come back in 8 years, we'll start to get more and more than married 25 years. It's foolish to say that today's marriages can't last when there are examples right here. And I'll give you another proof. To say that marriages can't last because of the culture we live in, that would be like saying, well, it's just impossible to avoid alcoholism or drugs or immorality or gambling because of the cultural pressures of our day or indebtedness or whatever. I mean, people do avoid those things. They don't all become enslaved by them. So the fact that many people do live above those things is proof that you can. And so the very fact that people are staying together is proof that marriages can indeed endure in the 21st century. So that's a myth. Okay, number 2, that marriage is about me. That's a myth. I hope you know that's a myth. Please know that's a myth. But when a lot of marriages... Shall I repeat what you said, Richard? Richard said, no, it's about her. And that is true. That's the perspective he needs to have. That's what I'm going to talk about. It needs to be about the other one. Very good, Richard. I'm going to give you a plus on that one, even though that's not what you meant. He is. God bless you. Cha-ching, right? A lot of times when people are getting married, I'll ask them why they're getting married. Why do you want to marry this joker, this guy here, this person? And a lot of times the girl will say, well, he makes me feel so secure. Or the guy will say, well, she makes me laugh. You know, she's so fun to be with, that sort of thing. And that's all great. But most responses tend to be more on the self-centered side. And again, I get that. I'm sure I was the same way. Love ought to make us feel good. It ought to do something for us. If you feel more miserable because you're about to get married, then that might be an issue. You know, so it ought to make us feel better. But the problem is we get into marriage and we start convincing ourselves it's about me. It's about getting my needs met. There's been a lot of research done on this. And of course, not just experience, but the research has proven otherwise. I want to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But first I want to tell you a story about this couple that was getting married. And they were talking to the preacher about the unity candle. You know how the unity candle is. There will be two candles, one on the left and one on the right. Each one represents the bride and groom, their individual lives. And then they light the unity candle. And then traditionally, they'll blow out their individual candles to signify their desire to be one. Okay, the two become one. Well, the preacher was explaining to them that in our modern times, a lot of people are choosing, after they light the unity candle, to keep their individual candles lit. To say that even though we've become one, we're also individuals with our own unique personalities. So a lot of people are doing that these days. And the preacher was saying, so when you light the unity candle, do you want to extinguish the candles or do you want to leave them lit? And the guy says to the preacher, well, can we leave mine lit and blow hers out? Now, see, this guy is going into it with the wrong motives, isn't he? You see, here's what research has shown. The happiest marriages are those where each partner, each spouse, the husband and the wife, seek to make the other one happy by meeting their needs. And when we get caught up in our own needs not getting met, we begin focusing on those unmet needs, and we generally get frustrated as a result. And then when we get frustrated, we no longer pay attention to meeting our spouse's needs. And our not getting our needs met develops into a giant boulder between the two of you, or a fence that keeps you from meeting each other's needs. But here's what happens. When you start focusing on the other spouse and meeting her needs and his needs, then what happens is a marvelous thing. Your needs somehow become less important. And many times your needs end up getting fulfilled because your spouse often responds in kind. Now, let me say, too, that there is a time, and it is appropriate, if there are some unmet needs in your life, it is appropriate for you to sit down with your spouse and address those. I'm not saying you just need to go your whole life and say, well, Pastor told me not to talk about this, but I'm supposed to focus on her. I mean, there is a time and a place for you to sit down and lovingly, compassionately talk about that if there are some certain things in your life that aren't getting met. But generally speaking, if you start focusing on just your needs and you just shut off meeting your spouse's needs, that's usually what happens. That becomes a barrier between the two of you. You get frustrated, you get angry, you get resentful, and you're not focusing on your spouse. You're just focusing on your unmet needs, and it just becomes all you see. So I want to challenge you to focus on your spouse's needs and see what happens. Okay, number 3. It is a myth to think my spouse shall meet all my needs, or my spouse should meet all. This is something that we buy into, right? Don't you hear it a lot of times? People will say, well, when I get married, you see, my spouse will complete me. You know, we get this idea that when we get met, my spouse will meet every single one of my needs. That's a myth. That's a myth. There isn't a person in this world that I know of that could meet every single need that another person has. A lot of times we put that burden on our spouse that you should meet all of my needs. And that's not true. One marriage counselor named Judith Viorst, I was reading an article about her, and she said that even in a marriage that's fundamentally fine, that there were couples very happy, there's still going to be a certain amount of disconnect. Just a certain amount. She called it loneliness. Certain times when just certain needs aren't being met, and because it's impossible for a person to meet everybody, or every need somebody has. I want to give you an example. And I've talked to my wife, we've talked about this, so I'm not talking out of turn. But with us, there are certain needs that we do not meet in one another. No matter how hard she tries, Cindy will never understand the thrill I get out of throwing a perfect shot in bowling and getting a strike right when your team needs it, you know? Or when my favorite team scores a touchdown in the final seconds to win a game and I'm dancing all over the living room and she's looking at me like, this guy is really weird, you know? She'll never get that because she doesn't care for sports, you know? And I'll tell you a funny story. She has bowled in a league with me before. And a few months ago, we went bowling, the two of us. And you know in the 10th frame, if you get a spare, you get one more shot, you know, bonus. All right? Most people love that. All right? She's bowling. She doesn't realize it's the 10th frame. And she's throwing her second ball, and she gets a spare. And she's walking back, and I said, hey, you get another shot. And she looks at me and says, you mean I have to roll it again? Yeah, well, you don't have to. You could just kick it down there if you want. Now, let me say this too, though. She certainly has entered this world of mine. It's not like she's like, well, I don't really care. I don't care about it. I mean, she wants to know how I bowl. I'll text her my scores a lot of times when I'm bowling. She encourages me to bowl. If I need a new bowling ball, she'll say, get you a new bowling ball, you know. And she's really behind me on that because she knows it's a big stress reliever for me, and I really enjoy it. But she'll never really get that because she just doesn't get it. Now, let me say this. I will never get how she loves trying new foods and beverages and experiences out in the world. And, you know, I'm like, I want what I can predict and know. We were in Jamaica about 6 years ago. They had this buffet breakfast, you know, and they had this green juice. Luke and Jordan were there with us. Micah couldn't go because of his schooling at that time. And Cindy and Luke were a lot alike. And Cindy's like, ooh, green juice. What is it? I don't know, but I got to try it. And Luke's right there with her. Jordan and I are very much alike. And we're like, ooh, green juice, what is it? Don't know. Stay away from it. Because I want to know what it's going to taste like, what it is. I want predictability. And I'll never get that. She had a pizza yesterday at a place where you build your own. I swear she had 12, 13 toppings on that thing. And it didn't cost any more because you built your own on one price. And she had artichokes. Artichokes, spinach, ginger, red tomatoes, zucchini. I mean, it looked like your garden, I'm telling you. It looked terrible to me. And I look at that, and that to me is just not pizza, you know. But it's just so funny because I look at that and I think, ooh, you know. We're very different on a lot of these things, but we try to, I think this is important. Even though your spouse can't meet all your needs, it is important to enter each other's world the very best. You don't say, well, that's just your thing. I don't care about it. I don't want to hear about it. You need to care. You need to enter their world at best, even if you don't participate. You know, have a heart for it, care about it. I mean, it would break my heart if I came home and said, I don't really care. Don't want to hear it. You know, I'm going to bed. Good night. That would just break my heart. You know, and I appreciate the fact that she cares. And so enter their world, even if you don't click on every activity and event, you know, she'll care and find things that you do share in common and do. Because we found some things that we do we enjoy together, and we participate in those things. Okay, number 4. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence. These last two are really big ones. They're all important, but these last two I really want to hone in on some very important information. Because this one right here leads to many a divorce. And especially if you're a younger couple, or you hope to get married someday, or whatever. I want you to pay real close attention. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence. It tears apart many marriages. Here is what the grass is greener myth looks like. It's when you start thinking, you know, I really think I would be happier if I were married to so-and-so. Or if I had a wife or husband like that. Or if I was married to that person, I wouldn't have near the problems that I have in my marriage right now. And that's the grass is greener myth. Now I want to tell you something. I want to be very honest with you. I want you to hear this. If you leave your spouse to go marry another because you think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, you're not getting rid of your problems. You're just trading them for more problems and different problems. And in addition, you're also fracturing your home, and if kids are involved, you're destroying their lives. And so don't buy into this myth. Here's how it often happens, or at least here's one scenario. Let's say there's a husband who's married to a woman, and he's very frustrated with her shy personality. He imagines that he would be much happier if he was married to a woman who was more fun-loving, who liked to go out to social events and gatherings. Meanwhile, his wife is just content being at home all the time and really not getting out with other company. And that bothers him. And he thinks, boy, if I was married to somebody else, I would be so much happier. And he meets somebody who's like a social butterfly, always planning events. She's always into the latest cultural things. And it's like, in his mind, this is his dream girl. And they end up having an affair. He divorces his wife. He marries this other woman. Everything's great now, right? Hardly. In fact, it's getting worse. He soon finds out that this woman that he thought was so perfect has a very domineering personality, who likes to be in control of all things, and she kind of calls all the shots at the house. And he never has any say in anything because she's kind of a ruler of everything, and he kind of just keeps quiet just to keep the peace. And this woman that he thought was so perfect because she was such a social person ends up being a nightmare. And you might say, oh, it doesn't happen that way every time. It happens that way a lot. In fact, let me tell you this. Divorce rate among second marriages is higher than it is in first marriages. Now, that ought to tell you something. Because a lot of times people leave a spouse to go another because they think they're going to be happy. And a lot of times what they get is great, great disappointment. So if you get those thoughts, and most people do at some point, they think, well, boy, if I was just married to somebody else, if I was married to that person, I would just be so happy. Listen, it's just a lie from hell. I'm telling you. It is a lie from hell. I was listening to a CD this week about this preacher talking about this very thing. And he said the grass isn't greener on the other side of the fence. The grass is greener where you water it. All right? So you water your own grass at your own home, and you pour into your wife or your husband, and you build them up, and you work on your own marriage. And you'll find green grass there, and you won't want to stray. And another thing the same preacher said, he said, make the grass in your marriage so green that everybody else's looks brown by comparison. Oh, that's a pretty cool statement. You know, build your own marriage up, make it as good as you can, so when you look at other people's grass, you're not so tempted. It doesn't look so inviting because your marriage is so wonderful. The grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. It's a lie. And many people have found out way too late. Don't let that happen to you. Okay, number 5, the last one. Since we are in love, we will never argue. I'm glad that got a chuckle because it amazes me how many people believe this. I mean, I see these starry-eyed couples just starting out. Oh, he's just so perfect. You know. Ruth Graham, who's married to Billy Graham, said that if two people agree on absolutely everything, one of them is unnecessary. And keep in mind that you may argue about some very important matters, like child rearing, discipline, financial matters, in-laws, where to spend the holidays. It can be very, very destructive in a relationship if it gets out of hand. All kinds of things. Certainly communication and interpersonal relationship matters. And so I want to share with you some things that hopefully can be helpful. And as I do, I want you to know that I do not have all this stuff down. You know, I'm in process on all that. I've messed up many, many times. I've asked my wife not to testify about this, but I have messed up many times. Let me just give you a few thoughts when it comes to when you disagree on matters, all right? First of all, enter the subject gently. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you're looking at your credit card statement online, for example, and you look over at your spouse and say, why in the world did you buy those clothes at JCPenney the other day? You know we're having a hard time making ends meet. I can't believe you did that. Tell you what, there's a 99.99% chance you've got an argument on your hands because of the way you entered this issue. You were accusatory, you were cruel, you were belittling. You know, how could you do such a thing? You know we're having some issues here. I can't believe you did that. Almost certainly going to have an argument. Or if you say something like, I hate when you say that to me. That just irritates me. You know that bothers me. Why do you talk to me that way? 99.99999% chance you've got an argument coming. It's because of the way you've entered the discussion. It's accusatory, it's belittling, it's hurtful. It's not the way to do it. A lot of times, you know, when we experience something, sometimes we just want to react. We've got to give it more thought. It's much better to say, honey, you know we've had some issues with our finances, but how can we work on this to where we can pay the bills better? What can we do to get our finances in line? Making it a we thing instead of just saying, why did you do this? That was so stupid. Instead try to approach it as a team and gently, without being bitter, mean, cruel, hateful. Okay? And this is one of the most important things, so you set the tone right there. Now, if you enter it gently, it's not a guarantee it's not going to turn into an argument. I'm not saying it's not. It still could. But if you start out in a rough way, it's guaranteed to start out in an argument. Another thing, too, is don't be hurtful in the words you say. Don't call the other one a jerk, an idiot, you're stupid, or you're mean. Don't call each other names. Don't say things that are belittling to each other. So don't be hurtful. I know it can be hard when you get angry. I know. And I've said some hurtful things in my time, but try not to do that. And then another thing is, and this is really maybe one of the toughest, is don't try to win. Don't make it about winning. It's hard with our ego, we want to win. We want to be proven right. I was right. I knew it all along. But if your wife's over there in the corner crying, does that really make you feel better, guys? Because you won? All right, winning isn't the thing. It's about the marriage winning. About the two of you working something out. Not about you being right and you proving yourself. And same for the women, too. If you win, but your husband's over there feeling like a mouse because you just destroyed him, that's no win for you. It might make you feel better because you were right, but it's not a win for the marriage. And so it's about the team winning, okay? About the marriage winning. It's a hard one, I know, because we're all human and we all want to be right, okay? But try to think of it as the marriage. What's the best for the marriage to come out on top? Another area I want to talk about, this will be the last one, has to do with personality. Cindy and I have done quite a bit of study in personalities, and as you probably know, they've divided up personalities into 4 basic kinds. And we have found this to be very helpful in our relationship, because it helps us to understand each other and understand our behavior and why we are the way we are. My favorite, because I'm just such a simple person, my favorite breakdown of the personalities are lion, otter, golden retriever, and beaver. Have any of you all heard those 4 breakdowns before? All right, let me just give you real quick what those mean. The lion is a take-charge person, very strong personality, a great natural-born leader. An otter is a very people-oriented person. Needs to be around people. Where's the party? Is their watchword. They want to be where the fun is, okay, where the action is. A golden retriever is a very compassionate person. A golden retriever is like the person that if you say that you're hurting or something's going on, they'll look you right in the eye and say, well, tell me about it. They're really compassionate, real caring, a very tender heart. And the beaver is a very detail-oriented person. Very analytical, logical. They have to-do lists for everything. They even have a to-do list to remind them to make a to-do list. Okay, yeah, that's a beaver. And there's no right or wrong personality. They're all who you are. It's the fingerprint that God has given to you, and they all have good things about them, and they all have things that you have to work on about them. There's pros and cons to all of them. And Cindy and I discovered this about ourselves. It really helped us because, there are times when one of us might be tempted to get mad at the other like we don't care or that, and then we find out, it's just who they are, personality-wise. It's kind of what they need. Like, I need a certain amount of time by myself. I love people, but I get to a point where I'm sorry, but I'm done. And we were out Friday, we went to a pastor's retreat, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday down in Sulphur, Oklahoma. And we were out Friday with some people. Had a great time, the afternoon. But there got to a point where it was like, okay, I'm ready to go back to the hotel now. I'm just done. And of course I couldn't do that because we were in a social setting. But inside that's what I'm thinking. That's the beaver in me. That's the introvert in me. I just need that time. And us understanding that really helps us a great deal. And here's where the differences kind of show themselves. If you're getting ready to play, like, let's say you get a new game or something, an otter's like, let's invite everybody over and have a good time. And the beaver's got his nose in the instruction manual. Okay, how do you play this game? Okay. And this can cause frustration because the otter's like, who cares? We just want to have fun. Let's get the chips out and the pop and get the game going, get the friends over. And the beaver's like, well, we got to do this right. We got to follow the rules, And that's maybe a little bit extreme, but that's kind of the idea about how people are different. And it really shows in relationships. And you might be a lion, you might be a golden retriever, but it's very important to understand who you are, personality-wise, so you can see that, it's not that my spouse is trying to be difficult. It's just who they are. They want to follow the rules if they're a beaver. They want to be around people if they're an otter, and that really is important. Like an otter is kind of like, where are the people? Where's the fun? Doesn't care about details. The beaver is, okay, let's do this right, let's follow the rules. Now, let me give you an example of something that happened years ago, but we've joked about this many times. When we were in college at Mid-America Christian University, for 1 year down in Oklahoma City, we shared a house with another young couple. And one Friday, classes got canceled because of snow or something. And the other couple, by the way, were named Steve and Avalinda. Her name is Avalinda. And classes got canceled. Cindy comes up with this idea. She looks at me and says, why don't you and I drive down to Odessa, Texas, and we'll surprise my mom. We want to tell her we're coming. She has no idea. She wouldn't expect it. Let's just do this, And that's an otter. An otter's spontaneous. An idea comes, let's do it. The beaver's like, hold on, that's not in my plans. That wasn't on my calendar. That's how a beaver is, seriously. And you can see how this could cause some issues. Well, this was really funny. In the next 2 minutes, here's what happened. Steve and Cindy were at one end of the table, and they're like, oh, that would be a blast. Your mom wouldn't see it coming, and it'd be creating memories. What a great weekend that would be. What a great experience. Meanwhile, at the other end of the table, Avalinda and I were down there talking about, well, how much is this going to cost? What time will we get back? Will we get back in time for classes on Monday? And will the car make it that far? And all these practical things. And they're down there just all excited. Oh, it'll be so fun, Now, here's what we talked about sometimes. We said, you know what? If Cindy had married Steve, they would have had tons of fun exploring our world. But their finances would have been shambles. They probably never would have done taxes. And the IRS would have showed up their door, and they probably would have spent the majority of their lives in prison.